Okay. Okay, Dr. Iman, you can take it away, please.
Okay. Well, good afternoon and good evening to everyone. Thank you so much, all of you, the panelists, the speakers, the moderator, but also all our friends and colleagues and women who are listening to this chat. Thank you so much for joining our ChangemakHER Chat series. This is the series about the intergenerational conversation for change. So it's about the intergeneration, young and adult people speaking together. And this is powered by WISE. WISE is the Women Initiative for Social Entrepreneurship. It's a global movement within Ashoka, where we are trying to redefine success from a women's lens as social entrepreneurs, and showcasing how women-led organizations do have an impact which is different than in a different way and measure. Now, this chat series is really a new era into the WISE movement, because we've been always very active in aligning with and trying to appeal to and invite young change makers in Ashoka, young women who are determined, who are leaders in their own right. And we've done a lot of things. We've elected young change makers, we've had them in summits, we've involved them a lot with our activities across the globe. But I think this series is interesting because we are inviting them, as we are inviting Manat today and others in the past events, to become partners, equal partners and leaders, to share their experience, to teach us, but also learn from adult Ashoka Fellows and social entrepreneurs. So this conversation today is a conversation between two women, one adult and one young, who share a lot of similarities, because we believe everyone is a change maker, and Manat and young change makers are future social entrepreneurs. And they will come and they will discuss under the moderation of my dear friend, Zeynep, who is really the head of Gender Next Now program, and a lot more than that. She's been with Ashoka for a long time, and she has been, her mark is already felt by everyone in Ashoka. So I would really, really like to thank all of you for coming today. I would like you to join the women movement, all of you, young and adult and every age, because again, WISE is a movement that really tries to tell the world, the ecosystem, that we do have an impact as women-led organizations and women social entrepreneurs. I don't want to expand, but I want you also to join our other chat series and to come and learn more about WISE and about our Young Change Makers program in the Arab world and the globe. Thank you very much. Thank you, Geneva, for organizing this. And the stage is yours, Zeynep.
Thank you, Iman, for this very nice introduction and all these inspiring invitations. I'm sure it's gonna find its appeal among our audience. And thank you for having me for this role of hosting space for these two extraordinary women. So our panelists today are Ashoka Young Changemaker Manat from the US, joining us from Delhi today, and also Ashoka Fellow Paramita Banerjee from India, joining us from Calcutta, from her home. Manat is the 18-year-old founder of Object, a nonprofit promoting confidence in young girls by connecting them with women role models through storytelling. Object hosts monthly workshops with women speakers who come from very different walks of life. So CEOs, authors, doctors, Olympians, you name it. And they share their stories openly. They lead an activity together with the girls, and they also mingle together over food. Manat also enjoys journalism and has written over 50 articles for leading media outlets like Sports Illustrated Kids, Scholastic News Kids, the Los Angeles Times, and the Stanford Daily. So Manat, welcome, and it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
I'm super excited to be here and excited to talk with everyone.
So I'll move on to Paramita. Paramita is a social activist who dreams of a world where every young voice counts. For almost 3 decades, she has worked with young people from marginalized communities, creating safe spaces for them, enabling them to voice their issues and concerns in a manner that can persuade adults. And I'm very curious to hear more about this, actually, how she actually succeeds in overcoming these barriers. And also kind of helping adults to learn how they can and should take young people seriously. She is the co-founder of Chief Functionary of DIKSHA, an organization that works with children and youth in the red light areas of Kolkata, India. She was elected as an Ashoka Fellow in 2016 and is considered the midwife who facilitates the birth of new leaders who then build their own brands. I love this, as demonstrated by her lifelong work. So I want to actually dive right in. Paramita, welcome also. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And I look very forward to our conversation. And I want to ask my first question. I hope it's not being nosy, but I'm very curious about how it all started for you. So can you both tell us a bit about how your journeys as a change maker began? Was there an aha moment? Was there a turning point for you? Was there someone who inspired you, enabled you, encouraged you? How do you recall those first times?
Well, Zeynep, thank you very much for your kind words, and it's lovely to be here. Thank you to WISE and Changemakers, but because I believe in living space for young people, so Manat, why don't you answer first and I'll follow you? And that's one response to your various question, by the way. Thank you. Over to you, Manat.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Manat Kaur, and I'm 18. My journey as a change maker started without me trying to even be a change maker. I didn't know what that word was until 3, 4, 5 years later. I really like math and science. I'm a huge nerd. But when I got into middle school, I didn't have the confidence to pursue that anymore, because as I looked around me, all the girls were focusing on boys and how they looked and the Kardashians. And I never really knew what to do with that. And so I ended up dropping out of things I loved, like robotics camp, stopped participating in class. And even my teachers wrote in my report cards to my parents that I was very hesitant and I displayed a lot of self-doubt. And my parents were very surprised by this, actually, because in elementary school, I was always the kid that the teachers were like, can you tell her to just like calm it down a little bit? She's talking a lot. So my parents were obviously very surprised by this and kind of shocked to see like, what's going on? And when I read this from my teachers, that's when I really realized myself that I'd actually lost a lot of confidence since entering middle school. And part of that had to do with the fact that I didn't have any woman that I could look up to who could tell me it's okay to not look like the Kardashians or always be obsessing over boys, and instead to do what you really love. And so at the same time, I was working as a youth journalist, and every time that I interviewed successful women for my articles, I always felt super uplifted that if she can do it, so can I. And so I bridged these two feelings. I loved storytelling and I was really struggling with my confidence. But when I brought them together and I interviewed women leaders, I felt super uplifted and I felt super inspired. And I realized that if we can just create access to more role models for young girls, then everyone will be more confident to pursue their passions, regardless of what that is. And that will be sort of the precursor to then addressing a lot of other issues like the gender barriers in STEM or politics. And so I ended up starting Object with that exact idea of combining my love for storytelling with this problem I was seeing in myself and with a lot of my friends that I spoke to. And so now we host monthly workshops with women speakers who share their stories, lead an activity, and then I really like to eat, so there's always time at the end to mingle with the speakers over food. And I've been running this for about 5.5 years now. I started it in 7th grade, and we posted over 40 workshops in the US, in India, and also in Palestine, actually. And it's been really incredible just to see all these women learn more about their stories and also see other girls not share than my experience of struggling with self-doubt and confidence.
Manat, thank you so much. So it comes from a very honest and personal place, is what I heard. Kind of what worked for you, you figured out that it would work for others. And I love kind of you combining your pain with your love of storytelling and, you know, adding in the food in there. And yeah, so thank you for sharing. Paramita, how about you? How did you start your change making journey?
Well, I mean, first of all, thank you, Manat. I wish there was a Manat when I was like 10, 11. Seriously. Now, jokes apart, same as Manat, my change-making spirit, though I didn't have the words then, that started very early. It was around 8 that people, well, I was a monkey of a child, and people started calling me a tomboy. And I had very serious objection to being called a boy. I loved being a girl. So if I didn't match the stereotype, why do I need to be a boy? That was like my first rebellion point. It's not from my family. I mean, nobody ever said that you can't do this because of a girl. I was naughty, I got punished, but not because I was a girl. So that was one beginning, and it made me already feel that there is something not okay with the world, way the world functions. And then I think around 10, I did something for which I got very severely punished. There was a flood relief collection, and my only valuable was a gold ring, a ruby encrusted gold ring that my grandmother had given me. And because I was so touched by what people are going through, that was the only valuable thing I had. So I took it out and put it in the flood relief collection, this thing. And I was severely punished for that. With no one explaining why I was being punished. So that was the second point when I decided that the adult world doesn't function well. Something needs to change. And so these stayed with me. You know, as a college student, I was into active politics. Again, trying to change the way the world functions. Many things didn't make sense. I walked out of a restaurant and a little kid from the pavement, scratching at my knee, saying, give me a rupee for some food, it made me puke. So now my stopping to go to restaurants was not the answer. I was very clear about that. Something needed to change somewhere. There was imbalance. So I started volunteering with organizations that work with children. And because I remained, despite the gray in my hair and my age on the calendar, I'm a 16 at heart. So by the time I was 16, I knew this is the age that brings in change. So I wanted to work with adolescents, and I was working with organizations that work with adolescent girls in red light areas. Now, why red light area? Because, I mean, children of women in the sex trade. Because by then I already knew, I was convinced that that is one of the epitome of patriarchal exploitation. I have nothing against the sex trade if an adult chooses to be in it, but not trafficked into it, not underage, not children below 18 trafficked into the trade. That I do have everything against. So, and I realized that just working with girls wasn't breaking the circle somewhere. You know, it was a vicious cycle that continued. Despite a lot of money and other efforts and other resources being put in, these girls were getting married and getting trafficked back into the sex trade. It was literally a 15-year-old school dropout girl who made me connect the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle. We were discussing underage marriage in a session, and she stood up. She was a class 5 dropout, waiting to be married with nothing better to do because her family wouldn't allow her to do anything else. But she managed to attend these sessions. So she just stood up and said, why do we girls have to take all the responsibility? Why can't the boys refuse to marry someone below 18? Why can't they refuse to take dowry? You know, and literally, believe me, it was like the last piece of the jigsaw puzzle falling in place. And I decided, yeah, okay, I have to start working with girls and boys together, teenager girls and boys together. And that's when the journey began more formally. But I think the change-making spirit, as I understand it, it's a kind of dissatisfaction with the way things are functioning around you. Then that gets narrowed down to some specific points of what exactly you want changed. That's one. The second is a degree of resilience and stubbornness that refuses, I mean, that doesn't allow you to give up. you keep searching for it, no matter how many blind lanes you hit. You just can't, you're not happy unless you're on that journey. These two things, I think, actually start very early, and Manat just gave me another piece of evidence for that. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I mean, yeah, like your kind of determination not to lose that spirit, to trust that spirit, and I think your ability to listen probably that led to that aha moment, because you know you probably were meeting lots of people. That comment could have passed you by, but you know you were there to actually you know realize what that sentence meant, and it identified kind of your work for the rest of your life, probably kind of addressing the systemic issue. I want to bring it actually to a method that you both use, which is fostering intergenerational dialogues. You both rely on this a lot. So I will ask you about the how-tos, but I'm wondering, even before you begin these dialogues, what are the prerequisites, in your opinion? What are the conditions that make it possible? Because in daily life, it's often, at least the culture where I am from, I'm from Turkey, Istanbul, and there's a big ageism in the culture. So it's so hard to even you know, start such a conversation in the day-to-day. So I'm wondering kind of how do you cultivate the environment for it, and how do your cultures play a role in this?
I think for me, I was actually shocked because a lot of the work I was doing, actually it revolved entirely around these older, successful women role models. And so if you think about it practically, there's no reason for them to be giving this 12-year-old girl any time of day, really. They have so many more important things they could be doing. But for me, I think even from my journalism days, I was always the youngest girl in the press room. Everyone else was a professional journalist. They'd been working for 30, 40 years, and I was 12, I was 10, but people took me seriously, and that gave me the confidence to then take myself seriously and feel like I actually have something of value to contribute. And that's the same thing then when I talk to these women role models who, again, were super busy, but they gave me some of their time and they said, you know, I actually really like what you're doing. I want to help you. That made me think like, wow, if they believe in me, I should believe in me too, right? It was sort of empowering just to see that these women who had accomplished so much were willing to invest their time and their mental energy in me. So I think just being there and open to listen and being involved is super, super huge. But then also this idea of taking people seriously. So not being like, oh, this is wonderful. Oh, I love this or everything, but being like, have you thought about this? And really taking us seriously as actual thought partners, as opposed to people that either need to be constantly like encouraged or constantly talked down to. There's a really nice medium that I think you can find.
Thank you. So for my part, number one, as I said, that I remain a teenager at heart. And because this feeling started very early that the adult world is not quite all right. And as I grew up, I felt very, very seriously that as an adolescent, I had huge problems because no one took me seriously. So I didn't want to repeat that. I wanted to connect with that self of mine, which refuses to give up. And I think that's adolescence, you know. It's ready to take risks. It's ready to dream. It's still forming its values. As I figured these things out, I made sure that I remain in constant touch with the adolescent in me. And I must mention my school friends at this point who are not social activists. Some of them are simple homemakers. Some of them are teachers. Some of them are doctors. But you should see us now. We're all women past 60. You should see one of our meets. We are easily the noisiest lot at that cafe. And we get kudos from the waiters saying that, madam, your spirit. So we become recycled teenagers. And this has continued over, okay, I've known these people for more than 50 years now, right? And this has continued over 50 years. And the reason I'm mentioning them is because without their knowledge, but at a very practical level, this connecting back, this being recycled back into our school days, back into our teenage, that gave me the belief, the conviction that it is actually possible for an adult to connect with the adolescent spirit. If there are two things, number one, you are in touch with the adolescent inside, and B, you are willing to believe that you can learn from adolescents. As an adult, there are experiences you can share to guide them, but they can also come up with ideas, dreams, and probably, some of them are, what can I say, like, to my adult mind, some of the ideas that the kids I was working with came out, they sounded outlandish. What allowed me to still listen and accept is that I could immediately connect with my adolescent, who was also believed to be having outlandish, outrageous ideas. So I really think that connection, that internal connection, that ability to accept and remember and connect with your experiences as an adolescent is what allows an adult to connect honestly with younger people. It needs, of course, I've grown up, I belong to a culture where you grow up with the constant refrain, don't talk back to adults. Adults know best. I think South Asia is one of the worst examples of that. So yes, it's probably the rebel in me who helped me question that very paradigm. Again, that, the building blocks of eventually shaping up as a change maker. These are the two important things. You have to challenge that mindset. As an adult, you have to learn to tell yourself that you do not know the best. And that becomes easy when you remember all your ideas as an adolescent and how you felt when the adult world rejected it. So these are the two prerequisites I will underline.
Paramita, I was going to ask you this later, but I think it's a great moment right now. So I wanted to ask you kind of what are the mental barriers you think adults face when it comes to engaging with youth as equals and leaders of change? Kind of, have you identified some patterns? You already offered us a great solution, but I'm wondering kind of how about the barriers that keep adults away from empowering youth to reach their full potential?
Okay, let me ask you back a question. You, Manat, everyone present here, when you were a teenager, Manat, you are a teenager still. Do you trust adults always?
I think so. I mean, would I blindly follow their advice? No, but I do respect it and look up to it a lot, especially, when it is coming from people that I would trust otherwise, like my parents, my teachers, friends, family. But that does not mean I think that I'm not willing to push back. I think it's like a little bit
that's
of both.
fine.
Or if you ask my parents, it's a little bit too much of the pushback.
Well, I mean, my friends, we were doing a lot of things that we were not supposed to do. So we knew that we're not going to be accepted if we share those with our parents. So of course, we didn't trust them completely. And when I started working with young people, that's the first thing I reminded myself, that they're not going to trust me. And think of it, there were two levels of barriers. I am working with kids from very marginalized background. So my privileged background already creates one barrier, one trust issue. And the second is I'm an adult. And, when you're working with young people who have been in touch with nonprofit organizations, the degree of political correctness they learn, oh my God, I mean, it is incredible. So two major barriers, distrust and skills in being politically correct. They will say only what they thought we want to hear. So I had to break that. And my method of breaking what worked. And so initially I just used these because I was groping for something and I just used it experimentally, but it worked so well that now I use it very structurally. Get back to the stories of all your naughty escapades as an adolescent. Let them know that you're not the ideal teacher, trainer, whatever. There are many not to be dones that you've done in your life. Trust me, that breaks the barrier at a go. They then learn to connect with that adolescent in that adult. I mean, and I want to line it. That, you know, be personal, be ready to share your own pranks as, yeah, thank you, Beatrice. So there was a chat comment. So that's the crux. The rest follows. Talk movies.
And you kind of turn the binary on its head, I think, Paramita, when you phrase it this way, that you know, when you put it like, you know, the adult world is not fine as it is. And when you encourage people to connect with their adolescent years, those years when they didn't accumulate so much to unlearn yet, I think it turns, you know, whose world is the right one kind of thing. And it really breaks the binary in that sense. And yes, Beatrice is saying from the chat that she's 60 and really is understanding what Paramita is saying. Adults are also acting in a way they shouldn't be proud of. Competing with each other instead of collaborating, showing their best interest. Yeah, like the state of the world, I mean, it's definitely not run by the youth at the moment. So there is more of a track record, let's say, a bad track record on the adult side for sure. Yeah, so I actually wanted to turn
Can
to
I just come in with one small point here, Zeynep?
Please, of course.
At least for India, I can see this. And this today, I can argue a little louder with the adult world about this, because India is one of the countries with the highest teenage suicide rate. And I don't think that's something that any country can be proud of, or any country can completely ignore. That there can't be a better indicator that we haven't really created a very good world for our youngsters. So, and I'm sure there are other examples. Japan is pretty much the same. So, you know, there are examples around us.
It's
climate,
like
wars,
definitely
everything.
Like this era is making it impossible to ignore kind of all the problems created with the current mentality. So definitely, thank you for that. Manat, I want to turn back to you actually, and something I'm curious about your work is your work revolves a lot around increasing confidence in girls, and you know, I'm wondering, like, what do you consider signs of increased confidence in groups you work with? When you see something happen, when is your moment when you say, okay, my mission is accomplished? You know, of course, the mission is never accomplished, but, you know, when you take it as an indicator of impact.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different things, and part of what helps me pick up on it is the fact that I've sort of lived through it myself, and so I know what those changes look like. But I think it's really a range. There's obviously the qualitative and the quantitative. In terms of the quantitative, we run surveys to get actual impact numbers and learned that 94% of girls had higher confidence and 90% were more likely to follow their passions. But more importantly for me, it's sort of the qualitative piece of seeing that some of the girls who've been attending our workshops for a couple months now are suddenly participating and raising their hands instead of sitting in the back. Actually, one conversation that really struck out to me was this mom who came up to me and she said her daughter had been attending these workshops for a bit over a year, and she had noticed how instead of always sitting in the back, now she was in the front asking the speaker questions and presenting during the activity what she had worked on. And so that was like the tangible change that I hadn't noticed, but the fact that someone else had noticed in their child really made me super happy. And then the third thing, which I was not expecting at all when I started Object, was that a lot of girls were just so moved by the organization and the impact of this idea of being more confident, is that they actually asked to join the team and help work with Object and help kind of grow its impact, and also became changemakers through that. And so I just thought that was the coolest thing ever, that they were so touched by it that they actually wanted to play a role in helping other people get access to it and helping the organization sustain its work.
I mean, it's like change making being contagious. Maybe contagious isn't a good word these days for these past 2 years, but that's very, very inspiring. Thank you for sharing. And I also wanted to follow up on the storytelling aspect of your work. So you use it as an empowerment tool. Just if you can share a bit of the how-tos, how does it enable girls in their empowerment? And also the women, I'm imagining the women who come as speakers, as role models, they also get empowered probably from the storytelling.
Yeah, I was thinking very intentionally about how I wanted to design this workshop format. And I realized that the most important thing was I just wanted to get girls in the same room with these women so that they could sort of look beyond what you see in the big Forbes interview or the magazine cover and actually get to know their authentic story. So a lot of the questions that I ask aren't about what are some of your biggest accomplishments, what are you most proud of? It's what do you do when you are scared, or what's a moment when you failed and how do you bounce back for that? What's the role that collaboration plays? And it's really about breaking down this super powerful image that they have and instead getting to know their vulnerabilities, their insecurities, and how do they kind of keep progressing despite that. And so I think when you can use stories to really get at the authentic person inside, that's when it really makes a difference. That's when, and I think Paramita was saying the same thing with what she was mentioning with telling her kids about like the dangerous adventures that she went on as a child. Like, it's about making it relatable. It's about, if she can do it, so can I. You have to be able to see yourself in that person in order to actually have them be a successful role model.
Thank you so much. It reminded me, anytime I've mentored anyone younger than me, I always felt like the mentee, actually. So it was definitely kind of, I always felt I learned more actually from, that, because, you have to be real, you have to be vulnerable. And that experience always, like in my adult life, at least, it always helped me so much that I always hesitate to call it a mentorship. I always feel it's interchanging roles in a way. Paramita, you have worked for decades in social change movements in some of the most difficult areas, and I just want to kind of, how would you explain it to people outside? Kind of, what is the value, benefit of engaging youth as equal partners in social change movements, for example? What is the benefit? How would you convince someone? And also, how would you scare someone? How would you tell them the cost of leaving youth out? How do you see these dynamics play out? If you were to convince someone to involve youth as equal partners, what would you tell them?
Okay, first of all, let me underline that it's not easy. Not in the culture that surrounds me and my work. Having said that, number one, when storytelling comes in here, very few people know, Ashoka knows Paramita, but very few people in our areas of work know Paramita. They know the young leaders of DIKSHA. They are the role models. Someone who was 10 years old when I started work is today 33 or 30 something, and is leading change. She is the role model, not me. So it's someone from the community, number one. And so the community starts believing in youth power when they see these changes, that what the women, the men could not change, these young people have changed it. They have changed their relationship with the police. They've changed their relationship with the teachers who would, children would drop out because they were constantly being discriminated as children from red light areas. Those teachers are today coming to volunteer in our centers. Those same teachers are calling up our older children to say that so-and-so is not attending school, please go and find out. I mean, the entire relationship has changed. So that's within the community, that in itself, these stories of change in itself do the needful. It's far tougher to get it across to donors, to the government. Trust me, these are the two. I mean, I would, if you allow me, I would share one experience. You know, we have something called child protection committees in all the wards, in all the villages. It's part of a government program called ICPS, Integrated Child Protection Scheme. And when these CPCs were being formed, I was the only one who raised this question in the planning meeting for government level. Is that, where are young people here? It's everybody is like, it's a government doctor, a government officer, a police officer, an NGO representative. Where are young people who will tell us about the protection issues? It was literally booed that young people need to be guided. But a few other organizations that we collaborate with who believe in this principle, they joined me. And so we kept pushing for this. And then we said, okay, please at least allow us to create a pool of young trainers who will train these very bureaucratic officials into the business of child protection. You don't need to give us any money, just give us, allow us to do this. So we put in whatever resources we had. Now read a few Ashoka Fellows together, a few women and men who were willing to volunteer their time, with copious free time, nights, midnight oil burning, creating a training of trainers, creating a pool of young people. And then all we ask the government for is, you know, issue a letter so that CPCs, the district protection units, allow these young people to go and train. The first district, the first and second, two districts, it was so successful that the government wrote back to us saying that, yes, please do it in every district now, we will pay for it. So that doggedness, again, I had mentioned it once earlier, I'm mentioning it again. I think it's one of the very, very important components of being a change maker. You have to be dogged, you have to have tremendous, I mean, it's not even resilience, it's probably more than resilience. You have to be anti-fragile. And I think that comes from the conviction that it works. People who are not ready to believe at face value, we can demonstrate it to them. So go ahead, demonstrate it. And this is systems change in my understanding. Has it changed the entire culture? No, but at least we now have young representatives in the child protection committees, and we have a team of youth facilitators to teach, to train adults in child protection issues. That, I think, is a huge step forward. So I hope I've made sense.
Actually, it was a very powerful example, Paramita, kind of also the obstacles, there is no youth to involve, there is no capable youth we can. So these are things we often hear when it comes to youth involvement. So I thought the example was very powerful, kind of how you peeled each layer of excuse, let's say, so that there was no excuse anymore, actually, from the system. So thank you for sharing that. Now, I asked all the questions so far, but I know you two are also curious about each other. So I wanted to actually give the floor to you and ask you, is there anything you want to ask one another before we close the session? So it's open mic for you.
Yeah, I'd love to. I'd be especially curious to learn about what steps that you think adults and older people can take to help young people just bolster their confidence to be change makers and take the risk that comes with that.
Manat, from my experience, as I said, it's critical that adults remember their experiences as young people. so that they remember that young people, particularly, adolescents, I mean, I would put that age, teens and tweens, so to say, may know a lot of things theoretically, but they do not necessarily connect it with everyday action. Risk-taking is an adolescent thing. They are going to, and the freedom to make mistakes. These are the two things that adults have to accept first inside. We learn from our mistakes. We all say it all the time. But when it comes to trusting young people, we most easily forget that one bit. We expect young people to come out with solutions that are proven, that will work like, well, no, we made mistakes, and adults make mistakes all the time. So you have to give that freedom to young people to make mistakes and learn from that, learn from those mistakes. So as I said, remain connected. That's a challenge, because we are socialized in a manner that teaches us all the time not to remember who you were as a young person. Cross that barrier. That's very important in my understanding. And if you do that, then the rest follows. You will know what to say, what not to say, and young people, one more thing, just lots of encouragement. Lots of encouragement. Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. I love that. And I think this idea of encouragement, and again, what you mentioned about relatability, are two of the things that really stood out to me in my own experience. So the fact that you're echoing that and actually taking proactive steps to do that with young people, I think is just the best path forward. Full steam ahead.
Thank you so much. So Manat, why don't you tell me that what makes you trust an adult? What would inspire you to work with an adult person, an elderly person, as an equal partner?
I think you kind of summed it up, right? It's equal partner. I might be 20, 30, 40 years younger than you, but I would expect and hope that you take me seriously. And actually that my youthfulness, I guess, the fact that I'm young isn't a deterrent, but it's actually something to be taken advantage of. This perspective I have on the younger generations, on Gen Z, on social media, things like that, is actually a big strength. I think in today's society, and even now, you're noticing so many companies and so many organizations are really trying to get a sense of what is this younger generation, what do they want, what entertains them, what engages them. And I think that the best sort of, even if it's a focus group of one, like a young person is the best person to directly go and get that information from. So really seeing that we have something to contribute, and even though we're young, that's not actually a bad thing, but something to be taken advantage of to help deepen the mission and sort of increase the impact.
Thank you so much. I just want to add one thing, Manat. I mean, in response to your previous question also, plus the way you put it, I think adults actually behave very stupidly if they don't trust young people, because you guys are the future. Our time is almost gone. We're going to be gone. The sense of achievement, the reward is in seeing people like you. That makes me believe, that gives me hope that we've done something. Maybe very little, but I've done something. When I see, people of your age and younger in my team, that's what gives me a sense of reward that, okay, fine, you've probably moved some blocks somewhere. So if we are futuristic, if adults remember to think of the future rather than the past, then there's no way other than trusting young people. Yes, we have the experience, but then you have the energy and the risk-taking ability to use that experience in a new way. That's it. Thank you.
No, I definitely agree with that. I think the one sort of nuance I would want to draw out, though, is that trusting young people doesn't necessarily mean that we don't need that scaffolding and that guidance. At the end of the day, we are younger. And so I think the beauty of it is really in finding that balance. And I think one of the things I really loved about how my parents supported me throughout my changemaker journey is they took me seriously. it was my project, they were always kind of at the sidestep. And if I asked them a question about how do I do this, how do I do that, you know, they were usually like, go figure it out. You'll probably make a mistake. It's fine. But when I really needed someone to be involved, they stepped up and they really gave me the scaffolding. So I was still figuring it out on my own. I just had a little bit of guidance. So I think trusting young people is great, but we should make sure that we don't replace that trust with just sort of like open leeway, do what you want. It needs to still be a little bit more structured and guided so we can still be learning, because it is completely new territory for us otherwise.
Mhm. Wow, there was such depth in this conversation, I thought, and such genuinity, because youth involvement kind of also has become a catch-all phrase where you kind of brush over it, but how do you actually do it? How do you use intergenerational dialogue to empower both the adults and the young people? What does it look like in different cultural contexts? I was personally also very inspired. So I'm walking out of this conversation with a list of to-dos, like call your adolescence friends, organize a get-together, don't forget that Zeynep at that age, and so on. So thank you both for sharing so generously with us today. I hand the floor to Geneva and the WISE team now, and they're going to let us know what our other calls to action can be.
Thank you, Zeynep. Thank you for your moderation, Zeynep. Thank you, Manat and Paramita, for your thoughtful contributions to this conversation. The WISE movement is really an everyone a changemaker movement at the end of the day. And so thank you everyone in the audience for joining us today. To be more involved with WISE, there are some links in the chat. You can also learn more about Object, Manat's initiative, and DIKSHA, Paramita's initiative, through the links in the chat. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time.